Hi, good evening. What's poppin'? It's your boy Big Rich, Queens, New York City, where we get busy. Mob Story Season 2. About to roll a little bit of Gorilla Glue. Salute to my GGC crew. You know how we do. Gentlemen, wipe your feet on the rug. Throw some smoke in the atmosphere. Let's get right into business. Part 3 of our little Joe Bonanno series from Ed Scarpa from Cosa Nostra News. Salute to you, sir. This is part 3 of the final chapter of our little Joe Bonanno series. The rehabilitation of Joe Bonanno. Joseph Bonanno was expelled from the Mafia in the 1960s. He became an unmade man, losing his button, his boss position, and his seat on the commission. But hope springs eternal, and Sly Don Peppino made ongoing efforts to rehabilitate himself for a return to Cosa Nostra well into the late 1970s. Either to start a new crime family in Arizona or to take control of the existing one in Los Angeles. Bonanno, from his retirement perch in Tucson, apparently kept hope alive that one day he'd stage a triumphant Mafia comeback. He never succeeded. Bonanno never got anywhere with these efforts, but if any man ever could have done it, Joe Bonanno could have. And in the process, some FBI agents believed he orchestrated or helped plot at least one hit of a Los Angeles capo who reportedly had been attempting to stage a coup and create a new West Coast family. Bonanno was also linked to narcotics trafficking. One of the more intriguing details from the FBI files in March 1979, Bonanno sent a message to Carmine Galante, his former underboss, when Galante was in the process of consolidating power in the New York Mafia. Galante was slain a few months later in July of that year, before he could force recognition of his status as the legitimate top banana in the Bonanno family. Shortly after the FBI got its hands on a copy of Bonanno's autobiography, though they were clueless about what it was exactly. Quote, as the Bureau is aware, a federal search warrant was executed on the premises of captioned subject at 255 Sierra Vista Drive in Tucson, Arizona on 3/17/79. During the search of the Bonanno residence, located in the basement office of Bonanno in what he has described as his buco, or safe, was a series of papers consisting of hundreds of handwritten notes of Bonanno, all written in his handwriting. Some of these were in English, and some were either in Sicilian or Italian. In the document, Bonanno traces the history of the commission, the ruling body of organized crime in the U.S. since it was organized in 1931. It is noted that he is an authority on the commission since he was a charter member, elected as the first one nominated to it, and in the 1950s and 1960s, he was the chairman of the nominating committee of the commission. He names members of the commission and the nature of some of their meetings. He identifies factions and enmities within the commission. Certain mob figures could have been sensitive to Bonanno's plight, especially in the case of Carmine Lilo Galante, who was no fan of Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese, the bosses who engineered the successful ousting of arch-rival Joe Bonanno. And while we're at it, Lilo also had some issues with the Genovese family, assuming there was a method to the madness that inspired him in 1974 to order someone to use dynamite to blast the bronze doors off of Frank Costello's mausoleum. A detailed story of Bonanno's life after his expulsion from the Mafia hasn't been written, other than Bonanno's own memoirs and memoirs by his son Bill. This topic has always been an interest to Cosa Nostra News. And they have been asked many times over the years about Bonanno's life following his retirement from the mob. In these weeks stuck at home with a surplus of free time, Cosa Nostra News decided to see what they could find by pouring through Bonanno's FBI files and some books, including memoirs written by former Chicago FBI agent Bill Romer, who retired to Arizona. Romer, Man Against the Mob, written in 1989, and one-time West Coast wise guy Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, a desgraciado, who once said that any made man who got involved with Joe Bonanno risked death because communicating with Bonanno was a capital offense. The Last Mafioso, 1980, with author Ovid Damaris, and Venges His Mind, 1987, with author Michael J. Zuckerman. One source we stayed away from, Bill Bonanno. We can't forget something once pointed out to Cosa Nostra News about Bill's. It was the spring of 1954. One source that Cosa Nostra News stayed away from was Bill Bonanno. They can't forget something that was once pointed out to them about Bill's truthfulness. Quote, "It was the spring of 1954. I took my oath at office in a large warehouse in Brooklyn. The heads of the 4 other New York families, Joe Profaci, Tommy Lucchese, Frank Costello, and Albert Anastasia, were there, along with other bosses from Buffalo, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Philadelphia." No, they weren't there, Bill. In tandem to learning about Joe Bonanno's fall in the early 1960s, the FBI, as per its post-Appalachian intelligence gathering efforts, was also learning the extent of the Mafia's penetration of the country. They were building on leads from the investigation of the 1957 Appalachian meeting, plus details gleaned from informants like former Genovese soldier Joe Valachi. Interestingly, Joe Bonanno supposedly was the Mafia sponsor for both notorious turncoats, Valachi and Jimmy the Weasel. A disgracia. The latter, according to Romer. Finally, correctly recognizing the previous invisible criminal organization loosely sprawled across the continental USA for what it was, a wealthy and violent confederation of large interlocking crime rings with a vast and seemingly limitless ability to corrupt. The FBI had hit upon an extremely effective way to quickly update and expand the knowledge base of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics had been building since the 1930s. The FBI planted electronic listening devices, bugs, in the headquarters of the mob bosses. The spigot had been opened and the details were spilling. Law enforcement learned who was who and who did what in the mob. Bonanno first purchased property in Arizona in the 1940s. Specifically on January 28, 1943, he told the Immigration and Naturalization Service that he had moved to Tucson, Arizona, and had taken up residence at 1122 North 1st Avenue. As per the FBI, on January 11, 1943, Bonanno became embroiled in a gangland killing that rocked the entire Italian community in the United States. Carlos Tresca, editor of the Italian language newspaper H. Martello, and a self-proclaimed anarchist, was shot on a street corner in Lower Manhattan shortly after leaving his office. The prime suspect was quickly established to be Carmine Galante. In March 1943, a publication was issued by the Friends of Carlo Tresca condemning the Castellameresi branch of the American underworld and its leader, Joseph Peppino Bonanno, an iron-willed, truculent ruffian. Bonanno, unfortunately, was not around to enjoy the description because on January 28, scarcely a week after the New York Police Department announced that it had assigned 1,000 policemen to the Tresca investigation, he informed the Immigration and Naturalization Service that he had moved to Tucson, Arizona, and had taken up residence at 1122 North 1st Avenue. On September 8th of 1959, he attracted the Chicago outfit's attention. As per Little While, the FBI wiretap in Chicago, outfit boss Sam Giancana and consigliere Tony Accardo had met to talk about an upcoming election on a local prosecutor who they were certain about taking cues from the FBI regarding gambling raids. Then they talked about Joe Bonanno. Joe was making waves, Giancana told Accardo. Joe had been acting very independent in his dealings with his New York colleagues. Bonanno had also moved to Tucson and was planting a flag there, Giancana said, adding that whoever goes for a vacation or lives there, they gotta go to him now. The big tuna was not happy. "The cocksucker," Accardo bellowed. "That's open territory. Who is he to plant a flag there and take up squatters' rights?" But Romer, who had highlighted the little back and forth between the two Chicago mobsters in his memoir, seems to have emphasized the wrong place. In Bonanno's file, it is noted, Accardo and Giancana discussed the possibility that Bonanno was then trying to expand his influence to include the Nevada gambling bonanza, even though that has traditionally been a loose or open territory or which any or all of La Cosa Nostra families are allowed to have their members conduct activities. First of all, I want to salute to Ed Scarpo in writing such a good series. As far as Joe Bonanno is concerned, salute to Ed Scarpo, Cosa Nostra News. Mob Story Season 2, salute, respect. Let me know what you're smoking on. Like, comment, share, and we will talk soon. Salute.